Hi, I'm Nima Gamsari, founder and CEO of Blend.
Hi, I'm Aarthi Mural, Chief Customer Experience Officer at M&T Bank.
Aarthi, great to see you again. We've been partners with you all for a couple of years now. Very excited to be chatting with you about some of the future of consumer banking, and also I'll be sharing kind of my perspective on the technology. I'm curious, maybe to start off with, one thing that I've been tracking a lot during the last 6 months or so has been, there's been an incredible rise in the fintech world with the Chimes and Robinhoods and Daves coming into banking and becoming more, I guess, getting a huge user base. What's your take on that as an existing player with a large customer base? How do you think about that? And how have you used that to drive change at M&T?
I think the key is always to make sure that we have a great grasp and understanding of what our customer and community needs are. That's really the first step, and that's really where it should start from. And I think from there, we take on the opportunity to determine how do we fulfill on those needs. And I think about fintechs as great partners to embark on relationships to deliver on those needs. And there's enough precedence in the environment now with larger institutions and organizations, even outside of FIs, to partner with fintechs to deliver on those needs. And so it's all about knowing your customers, knowing your segments, what are the value propositions that we can deliver to fulfill their needs, and then figure out how we go around delivering that.
Do you think the change in behavior is real and persistent, or it's a temporary one? Like, as an example, Los Angeles just shut down all restaurants, and so now there's a huge shift towards delivery. And that question is that permanent, or do people go back to restaurants when restaurants are open again? Curious what you think about the changes that you're seeing in your customer base, and if you think those are permanent.
That's a great question, Nima. I myself kind of pondered on that for a few months. When I joined M&T back in Feb, I got the opportunity to spend about 45 days with customers in person, in branches, in retail locations, and with employees in various different markets. And very quickly, we all went home and had to adapt to a whole different way of working in some industries. But when I think about the acceleration that's happening around us, it was already underway. I don't think that the shift in behavior is something new, as much as maybe it would not have accelerated as much had we not been in a pandemic environment. But here we are. And what we're seeing both with our customers and customers in the banking industry in general is they like the change. Most customers like the change. They like the ability to conserve some of their time and energy and put it towards more important activities in their lives or their businesses. And so I do expect a lot of these behaviors to stick. The question is, how might we deliver on those changed behaviors and expectations in a really nimble way without creating a lot of friction?
Yeah, and one example that I like to think about around that is everyone early pandemic was given a week to start distributing small business loans to their customers, and you all did that. We're happy to call you a partner in that. But that pace of change is, I agree with you. I think the acceleration is definitely here to stay. And actually, one thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is that, I'm curious to get your take on this. Like, I feel like the technology generally, broadly, and the infrastructure around technology is out there now where you don't have to choose digital or phone or in person. Really, you can let the customer choose, and the technology can kind of support all of those things simultaneously. Like, the technology exists to support those kinds of things. I think it just hasn't been brought at this pace to this industry so quickly. I'm curious if you feel that way, and if so, like, what are some things you all are doing to start to bridge the gap between the legacy tools you have and where you want to be in terms of serving your customer?
That's a very packed question, Nima, but so important too. Our customers don't experience their lives through the lens of the organizations that serve them, period. Our customers look at their personal lives, their professional lives, their businesses, their consumer products that they have, all through the lens of journeys, their own personal experiences, the journeys that they go through, the reason they wake up in the morning, and their intent to purchase might be very different than how a traditional organization might view offering up products or services. So we are taking a really outside in, customer journey-led approach to making sure that we deliver on those experiences to our customers, so that when they do go through the very overly used term omni-channel experience, but when they do go through that, they're not feeling the seams and the walls of those experiences in an institution. They're really feeling it to be very fluid. They feel like the person that they're talking to really knows them. They feel like the value proposition makes complete sense for them. Hey, it feels like it was made for me. Those are the emotions and the moments that we're trying to connect to. We had such a great partnership with Blend and with you when we embarked with PPP. And the beauty of that, the secret sauce, as I call it, was really that we took in our need to support our business owners in our communities at the core of our purpose. That was the entire purpose of 2,000 employees at M&T who wanted to serve that. It was not to fulfill a regulatory or a government obligation to provide loans. It was all about, how do we help our business customers? They are struggling. It's a moment of anxiety, an experience that, frankly, no one has gone through in terms of a global pandemic. At least most haven't. Taking that approach is how we ended up partnering with you and with Blend to make sure that we had a seamless way to get customers into the process through the fulfillment of the loan, as well as eventually experiencing the whole of it in a very short period of time.
Yeah, and I think that was a really almost like a fun experiment for us. Like I don't know if either of us knew how when we were working together on PvP, either of us knew how we were going to do it until we just did it. And it was, I think that's pretty, I don't know, it's pretty unique to think about a bank as large as yours being able to move that fast. But that, I think that is important from like a survival standpoint. If things start to accelerate, some of the adoption numbers we've seen around some of these newer companies are pretty dramatic. And so the question is, if things start to accelerate, that does become really important. And how do you see, and one thing you mentioned was community, which one of your differentiated advantages is how connected you are with the community, which is great. But what are other things that you think of as either unfair advantages or reasons that you will be better at this than, the next bank or the next company that tries to do this? What are other things that you all, or maybe talk more about the community aspect?
Yeah, sure. And it's an interesting environment. It's a very competitive environment, not just for banks. To your very first question, we've got fintechs, we've got other disruptors. On top of it, we've got experiences in our customers' lives that are so amazingly seamless that the competition is all around us. It's really not just in the financial services industry. And when we look at it from that breadth of a lens, M&T has always prided itself on being a very community-focused bank. They know their customers really well, and I think about that through the lens of segmentation. If you know your customers really well, then it really becomes, an approach of how might we take advantage of that and power that up through customer centricity. How do we power that up through the right digital tools at the right moments for the customer, with the right humans in the process to provide an amazingly engaged experience that customers walk away really delighted, versus thinking about amazing tools and technology. It's really all within the core ecosystem of the experience itself. I might ask of you, Nima, as well, how you envision kind of along those lines when you think about in your role. How do we see around the corner? So when we get into, it's almost Thanksgiving here, but when we get into the 2021 and maybe even 22, 18 months from now, how do those conversations happen with your partners? And how do we need to be thinking to be successful in those conversations when we think about customer behavior?
Well, yeah, great question. And as I think about that, one thing that I think about is, first and foremost, do I think the technology that needs to exist for 2022 and 2023 customers exists today? And the answer, frankly, is no. And the reason for that is not just because I think the digitization aspect, we all agree that acceleration is coming and the technology exists for that. But I think what we're starting to see is deep vertical integration of financial services, where car manufacturers are offering their own financing, and there's point of sale financing, and And that requires banks to almost in some cases shift their business models, and that's something, it's hard to predict those kinds of things, how fast they're going to happen, when they're going to happen. Or also the other thing that we're starting to see is more personalized finance for your customers. So, or for consumers more broadly, which is products that are more tailored and better tailored to those, to that, their needs at the time. Because as we saw with PPP, a new product can come up in a week or 2 weeks that needs to be delivered to customers, and that needs to be more personalized to what's needed for that moment in time. And so what I've been thinking about a lot recently is how do we make the underlying platform, like the things that we're building, so flexible that we don't have to know exactly what's coming, because I think it's unknowable, but that we have all the tools that when something comes with no code, with some configuration and some smart business users who are focused on customers, that thing could be spun up and turned on immediately. And I think that's something that if we can't do that, it'll be impossible to keep up with how fast things are going to change in 2 or 3 years. I think the acceleration is also going to actually increase in pace as well. And so as I think about that, and then I layer on the fact that, the sheer amount of possibilities in the market for greater accessibility about finance, financial services. A big theme in the election this year has been the people who have been forgotten and left behind. And I think financial services can play a really big part of that. And so if we can make it so that when consumers show up at your bank or any bank, they can see exactly what you can do for them in a very personalized way, 2, 3, 4 years down the line, it'll greatly drive accessibility. And so I think having that long-term, going back to your mission orientation point, having that long-term view of these are mission-driven companies that are driving real change for consumers in positive ways and are able to deliver that in a personalized way. I think that's where things are going. And the platform itself, the things that we're building, have fundamentally shifted as we started to think about that as our primary goal, instead of what it used to be for us was how do we deliver a mortgage or an auto loan or a home equity loan in a really simple and standardized way, which I think is still super important and has not been solved nationally yet, but that's just one piece of the puzzle.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that insight. I think speed, agility, I heard you mention both. The rapid pace of acceleration, that's another component. We've been talking and we've been hearing a lot around go-to-market strategies and how we can be more nimble and quicker. And we certainly see partnerships as a way to accomplish some of that as well. How do you think about the obviously you're in the business, but how do you think about the concept of being agile and having an agile mindset in large organizations, and how does it help us fulfill those customer needs and outside end in a timely way, like we did at PPP?
I think being agile is something that it seems really easy in concept. It's like, just be open-minded and be willing to change. But even at Blend, which is much smaller than in terms of number of employees than M&T Bank or many other banks, I see people feeling like when things change, when priorities change, whether it's because of coronavirus or a competitive threat or a new customer need that comes to the market, it's tough, right? And enacting that change requires a real top to bottom buy-in from the organization. It starts with me and it goes all the way through the organization. And I would take the same advice and give it to our customers and partners, where the more the buy-in towards the shift, the change is top to bottom, the more the leadership is involved in the changes. The reason that project around PPP was so successful with you all was you had your CEO and your chief banking officer and your CIO and just so many people involved in making, and you were involved, and then the teams below, of course, the teams below were also involved, but it was something where it was top to bottom buy-in. It was weekly check-ins to make sure that if there's a shift happening, and it's a shift that's going to be required to remain relevant, especially where it's so important to get these things done quickly, then have that top to bottom, have the willingness to be involved as the top executives in your firm, because without that level of involvement and buy-in, the people across the organization will wonder if this shift is worth it, because these things are really hard psychologically, whether you're at a 50-person or a 5-person company or a 500-person company or a 5,000-person company or a 50,000-person company, they're hard. And so having the top to bottom buy-in is absolutely critical. And this, I would say that's been true for all of our most successful projects, is we've just had a really great executive alignment that this is what needs to get done, and we need to be able to solve for this. And when a change happens, a change can happen mid-project, and we'll address it on the spot. And that becomes super valuable to everybody involved in those things, for the transparency, for the context, to be able to move fast.
That's fantastic. Sponsorship, advocacy, alignment, radical prioritization, all so key to that ultimate success and delivering on the mission and the purpose that you and I are talking about here.
Well, okay. So what are some things? So we were talking about some of the personalization, and we were talking about the how we think the digital acceleration is happening. Are there any specific things that you're personally focused on right now around setting the organization up to do that effectively? I think that, and also to be able to be more responsive and proactive in some ways around what things you see are coming. Are there processes or the programs you're putting in place? I think you mentioned some customer sessions with maybe thousands of people in your organization involved. Share a little more about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a few things we're doing to, again, power up, as I'm calling it, our already, highly charged culture that we have at M&T around caring for our customers and communities. But we've been able to use more innovative platforms to bring the voice of the customer inside the house. So how do we bring outside in all the way into all parts of the bank? And we do that through an amazing program every other week, and we get leaders across the bank to just listen to customer voices and watch customers, and we learn a lot. It's incredible. It can be painful. It's joyous. It's a lot of different emotions going through to learn that. But that's really the first step, is really make sure that we have the voice of the customer at the table, and we're doing that frequently, and we're doing it at all different levels and ways in the organization. But more tangibly, I mean, I think COVID has again forced us and many other banks to rethink the way we go to market and the way we talk to customers, because customers are not able to come to retail locations like before. So when we think about, digital appointment setting and for branches, that's really important to keep our employees and our customers safe, right, while making sure that they can get to the services that they need. We rolled out and bolstered our mobile and digital sign up so that maybe our customers who were not so digitally engaged could have an easy way to sign up and still see all the things that they normally would experience in person. Having conversations with our wealth customers through video, like we are on Zoom here. A lot of these conferences are virtual now, but having that conversation with a wealth advisor can be different. You're used to having a more in-person, in-depth discussion, and being able to do that on video with the right documents, being able to electronically sign documents, all sounds like really simple items, but super critical to deliver on what I call moments of truth for the customer and points that matter. And then lastly, we are certainly looking at across the full spectrum of the experience, critical journeys that matter to the customer, and reimagining how that could be to deliver on those right customer experiences, keeping the future in mind, keeping that 2022 experience that we talked about in mind.
Yeah, and I want to echo a couple things you said and just kind of share my perspective. One is on being close to the customer. I think the best companies in the world have top to bottom people are all very close to the customer. And it's not just aggregate statistics. I love hearing individual anecdotes. I love hearing specific customer quotes, consumer quotes. And I think, there's a famous, stories about Jeff Bezos where somebody will email his work email and he'll directly address it. And it's like a customer will, I should say. And I think that's really powerful, where it's like, if you're that plugged in with your customers, it's not, the overall data is always helpful to have, but the individual anecdotes become super powerful because you understand the why behind the what so much better.
That's right.
We do that. And that's something that I strive to work on. We see, again, our best customers, our most successful customers and partners are the ones who are able to stay really close to the customer and not overly, and it's hard. It's easy to get lost in big numbers. M&T Bank is a huge bank, lots of customers, and it's like, but it's so important to stay at the individual customer level in some ways to understand the depth of the psychology of what's changing and how people are thinking about things. That's one thing. The other thing is, as you're thinking about the new versions of this, and I love you saying reimagining some of these journeys, One thing that I think about is like when there's these huge there's these huge points of shift in technology possibility, as in when what's possible becomes fundamentally different. It's no longer good to focus on incremental change. Not sure I said no longer, still incrementally change the things that existed, but also on top of that, make sure we're taking into account what's possible now. And one thing that's really possible now, and video is a good example. For example, in the mortgage processes, doing video closings. It wasn't possible both for like regulatory reasons and video infrastructure 10 years ago, but it is possible now. And so the idea of closing a loan should be completely rethought from the ground up. This is something I push our team to do as well. When a new piece of data, a new data source comes out, now suddenly we can underwrite something 100 times faster. That means the whole process should be rethought, not just incrementally add that thing, that component, and hope that solves the overall customer need, the overall customer problem. And it's really hard. Something we struggle with at Blend too, which is not being overly tied to the way that we did something 5 years ago. We've been around 9 years almost. And so there have been significant technology shifts in the last 9 years, and digital is just one part of it, but the sheer amount of access to consumer data is another big one. The prevalence of mobile, there are more mobile devices now than computers, and more people, especially in underrepresented communities, have mobile devices than computers. And so those are the types of things that it just means that we really need to rethink these things from the ground up. And there is more technology now available than 5 years ago by a wide margin. It doesn't seem like a long period of time because of how methodically this industry has to move, because it's a regulated industry, lots of consumer money. But it's so important to do what you said, which is really reimagine it with what's possible. Make sure to educate people on what's possible, and then let them reimagine from the ground up what the new experience of the future could look like, because it's really hard to implement it, but it's so worth it when there's something 10 times better than the alternative. The customer satisfaction just becomes amazing through the roof.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, congratulations on 9 years for Blend. I think that's a phenomenal accomplishment right there. So true. I love that you mentioned data. We talk about digital, we talk about technology, but data is the king and queen of all of it as it flows through, and it helps us know our customers. When I think about how we show up in our communities and how we show up in our markets, representing the communities and through the lens of our employees is really important, and representing and making sure that we have adequate diversity, and making sure we have the right products and services that meet the needs of our diverse communities is really important. And it's personally very near and dear to me. And I love that at M&T I have the opportunity to do that and stitch together that story together, using data, using the lens of journey, using digital technology, all of that to bring it to life. So I love hearing that thread through as we're having this conversation here as well.
Yeah, and I think that is probably a core foundational piece, and it makes almost anything possible, actually. And the fact that computers can now, when people tell me something isn't possible, I often reference this AlphaGo computer beating the best Go players. And Go is an ancient Chinese board game that was thought to be impossible to solve, and now that's been solved with technology in the last few years. And so technology is very advanced. There's self-driving cars that are coming out. There's rockets that are going to potentially go to Mars. We can do this for our customers. We can do this for consumers. And it's really about figuring out what is the thing that will drive the real impact, and honing everyone around that to get everyone excited about it and have everyone want to go and solve that problem, because then it becomes something where you feel like you're not only building something better, but we're doing good in the world.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, and I think so. Last question for you, Aarthi, is, one thing that I've also seen ourselves fall into the trap of is sometimes letting the edge cases be the enemy of driving the simplest possible experience for the majority. And it's not to say that we don't want to serve the edge cases, because I think there are lots of good reasons to be able to serve a community and serve a group of people, no matter what their situation is. But as data becomes available, one of the realities of data is that it's broadly available, but only for a subset of the population. But that availability makes it possible to drive a truly one-tap experience. And yet people often get hung up on the edge cases and make the experience for everybody kind of a pretty good but not great experience for anybody, but it kind of works for everybody. So how do you think about that? And maybe it's along the thread of personalization, but how do you think about that as a problem that you have to figure out how to solve for as you get competitors coming into your markets?
Yeah, I think that's a very insightful question, and a reality of the financial services world where I've spent my past 20 years. And I have to say that is probably the most consistent conversation that I've had in the past 20 years of edge cases coming into the reimagining transformation conversation. It's going to happen because the reality is we do see them. We do see them in multiple different channels and varying different forms. So they're there, and they also turn out to be the most difficult employee experience. So when we think about experiences and employee experiences, it appeals to the emotions of the people in the room, and it creates a human reaction, right? To come in and share and say, I know exactly why this might not work. So I believe in turning those into a how might we statements and say, well, how might we solve for, let's say, 80% of the customers who go through this experience, and then have maybe a different lens or a different set of optics and a different set of data to think about how to solve for those edge cases. It's one of those natural tendencies where more of those emotions that come in, it tends to overtake the majority of the conversation. So no, it's not possible to solve for 100% of all customer needs. But I think that goes back to our earlier conversation on customer segments. Do you know our segments? We know what they need, and can we appeal to that while providing a reasonably palatable and reasonably delightful experience for those edge cases?
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think one thing that I've learned as I've been working through some of these problems is that it goes going back to the executive sponsorship, getting the executive sponsors bought into that concept of we're gonna solve for this subset, and that's okay. That's okay that it's going to be 30 or 40% of our customer base that's going to solve. We're still going to support the other 60%, but this 40%, we're going to first solve for and make that amazing, most simple, most transparent experience possible. And then we're going to keep expanding it over time. And once that buy-in is there, then I think it helps almost manage the edge case conversations. Because if we don't do that, I think you've probably seen this too, where when those edge cases come up, is that they end up making the experience for everyone kind of a least common denominator experience, and nobody's really happy. And I think that's where, and that's one of the beauties of technology is very flexible. And so you can have different flows and different paths with modern technology for different things. And so that's the thing we think about as a core tenet of our software is like, path A could be a one-tap experience. And if you're not eligible, it's okay if the other one's longer. If it's
right.
If it's meant to over time be figured out through data and through other automation, we'll figure it out, but it doesn't have to be something we solve for on day one. And once people get out of that mindset, I find it so freeing. Everyone starts to think about, okay, what can I do that's going to be really impactful for that subset and be a truly amazing experience and something that will wow them when they show up. Because then that's the thing that drives better net promoter scores. That's the thing that drives better, customer loyalty, having deeper relationships with you as their bank. And that's ultimately what, when I buy my iPhone, I'm always the first in line to get the next one because I love the product. And I feel like the product experience they gave me, even the buying experience they gave me was amazing. And so those are some things that I've been, thinking about a lot as we've been building out the new platform.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then the last piece I will probably pin back into that around the employee experience. When we think about digital capabilities, data, and customer experience, all that leads into making sure that the employee experiences tie really well. I'm a firm believer that they're all very correlated, and sometimes companies just have to make that investment decisions. In that, if those edge cases are causing significant employee friction and difficulty because it's manual and it can't be automated, well, how can we provide the right environment for those employees, support, empowerment, so that they can deliver on those experiences while supporting and transforming that 80% use case as well. So definitely a balance to be struck between them.
Yeah, exactly. If something only solved for 1% and made the other 99% way harder, it wouldn't be solving enough to make it worthwhile. And I completely agree with you. Well, why don't we take some questions from the audience now and hear about some of the things that they're wondering, or questions for you, Aarthi, or questions for me, or their bank.
Sounds good.